Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Hey folks, this is Kirby, and I want to let you know before the show starts that at the beginning of the listener question section, there is a minor spoiler. 37 minutes, 50 seconds in, just skip forward 10 seconds, you'll be good. Now on with the show. You're listening in Prime by Cortex, a show where we sit down to discuss the Cortex Prime mechanics and games. I'm here with my co-host JT Dimino, as always, and today we're sitting down with the narrative designer for Tales of Xadia. How's it going, Dan?
Good, and yeah, I am the narrative lead for Cortex RPG and Fandom Tabletop, and we are currently working on Tales of Xadia, in addition to Legends of Grayskull.
Yeah, I think JT and I were curious as to just your general, in with tabletop gaming in general, and also just how you wound up with fandom and working on Cortex.
I would love to fill you in as well as anyone listening who's like, who is this? What the hell? Well, why is he here? So my background is largely in writing and performing outside of tabletop, though I have been involved in tabletop gaming my whole life, pretty much. Just mostly as a player. I got into it in the late 80s, early 90s as a kid, and I spent a lot of the 90s playing White Wolf and, TSR games. But just as a nerd, I went to school for an acting degree, and I wrote plays. I was a playwright for a while. I've gotten really into comedy and sketch comedy and improv at first, but for the last 15 or so years, mostly stand-up comedy. So I do a lot of stand-up comedy. I've been on TV and stuff. Right around 2013-14, after I'd moved to Los Angeles from Chicago, my friend Brian Posehn, who is a very nerdy stand-up comedian, asked me to take over one of his friend's spots on his Dungeons & Dragons podcast. So I started playing on there, and it's called Nerd Poker, which is a reference to how nerds play D&D instead of poker. And we've been around since, before a lot of these D&D podcasts. So we're kind of old, but, we've been playing for a long time, and I've been playing on this podcast for a long time. And I took over as Dungeon Master eventually. So I've been their Dungeon Master for a few years, and it's a reasonably successful podcast. So I was the senior editor at Mad Magazine for a couple years. They, unfortunately, had to lay a bunch of folks off over on the Warner Brothers end of things. So, this publishing just got gutted for that whole company. And Adam Bradford over at D&D Beyond was like, oh, hey, Dan, you've worked with us at live events. You've done all this D&D stuff. Would you want to be a writer for D&D Beyond? And I was all over that. And he was like, we might have some bigger things for you down the lane. And he knew I had a background in performing, in writing long-form narrative stuff, like playwriting and stuff like that, and that I had written for TV shows. I'd been in TV writers' rooms, and that's sort of what I bring. I know you had Cam Banks on the show, and he does a lot of the mechanics type stuff for Cortex, and he manages how did he put it, wrap the Cortex around the IP rather than the IP around the Cortex.
Yeah.
It's more my job to find how a narrative inspired by the IP can work into the world and how to offer it up to players and narrators as a springboard into adventures and sort of come up with characters and plot devices and stuff like that.
And you recently released the playtest for Tales of Xadia. That was mostly you, right?
I gotta give full credit to Cam Banks and Amanda Valentine, who did tons of feedback rounds with me and tweaked some of the text. Cam came up with all the numbers for those pre-generated characters that you can see on the live stream right now, and he came up with their names. But I did come up with the backstories for all those characters and the value statements for those characters, and I wrote I came up with a lot of these ideas while talking to Cam Banks, but I scripted it all out. And the idea of the floating island I came up with, and I came up with basic. I want to take credit for the whole thing, but I did give him a 45-page document before they started hacking into it, so I will take credit for a lot of it.
Nice. And for Tales of Xadia, for our listeners who maybe don't know what it is, it's essentially the Dragon Prince. Well, not essentially. It is the Dragon Prince IP that's currently 3 seasons in on Netflix. With how popular it's become, it's hard to tell just how many people are coming in for Cortex or just coming in for Tales of Xadia, right? But will listeners need to have seen all 3 seasons in order to enjoy Tales of Xadia? Or to put it another way, like, how much lore and story can we expect to be broken out in the final product?
Well, think of it this way. Tales of Xadia is inspired by and takes place in this world. So, like, if it's like any tabletop role-playing game, if you know it's based on a pre-existing IP and you're just coming to it because of, like, the rule set, you just sort of, like, think, do you want to kind of, like, get the little primer that we give you in the book as, like, a lead-in, and that's enough for you? Or are you curious enough about a fantasy world on Netflix that you probably already have login for, and you might have your parents log in. I understand it's a complicated world out there, folks. Like, whatever you want, really. We are definitely going to take place in the most updated part of the chronology of the show, but we're taking care to make this operate largely independently from the show. And if you guys watch the show, or if anyone listening watches the show and you've already looked at the public play test, you'll probably notice these are playable characters that you can use, and catalysts, as we call them, and narrator characters that aren't already in the show. It's new canon that we presented to Wonderstorm and they approved. So, like, it's independent. You don't actually, like, have a lot going on other than it's like on the same continent. I don't know why you wouldn't want to go watch it. I feel like I've watched tons of. Yeah. I mean, like they're right there. Why would you play the tabletop game? Like, I don't want to catch up. There's not like huge spoilers, but I would tread carefully. If it's important to you that you're caught up, I would go binge real quick. The 3rd season's been out for a while, so I don't know why you wouldn't have binged already. I feel like I've seen tons of Netflix shows on accident at this point. I don't even know how I watched Bridgerton, but I woke up one morning and was like, oh, I know who all these characters are in love with, so.
They get you with those 5-minute trailers that they autoplay, and then next thing you know it, you're just watching the whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Tales of Xadia, I mean, those are only 9 episodes each. I think they were all 25, 30-minute episodes, so it was very bingeable. But
the Dragon Prince, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, Dragon Prince, yeah. And, I mean, in general, it's still high fantasy. It's a different take on how high fantasy works, but I think a lot of people who are perhaps jumping ship from D&D would probably feel right at home with Tales of Xadia.
I would like to think that, if you have any interest in fantasy, this would be really easy to pick up.
Yeah, and just out of curiosity, I'm not sure if you mentioned it and I missed it or not. Were you familiar with the IP before you were brought on to the project, or like had you watched the show?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's a really that's you were talking about how you're not sure how many people are coming over this from Cortex fandom and versus Dragon Prince fandom, and yeah, like, it's so popular. The Dragon Prince show is huge, especially with young adults and teenagers. So that's been suggested to me many times, just via algorithms. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
With regards to, we have the successful Netflix TV show. How much are the show's creators actually involved in the design process? It sounds like they are approving this playtest adventure and maybe future adventures going forward as lore, or is that too far off base?
That pretty much sums it up. I've gotten to Zoom meet with the creators and the writing staff, and they're all really cool folks. We run the ideas by them, make sure it doesn't interfere with any of the lore. They've either got sort of semi-revealed or completely hidden. And yeah, they're really cool about it. They want to make sure that what we put out isn't, not just style wise, but doesn't like leapfrog what they've got planned.
An official stance on it or not, but do you know, like, is the stuff that you come up with, is that considered canon within their canon as well then, or is it just two totally separate things and you just don't want to step on their toes?
Oh, it's as far as I know, it's canon. I am by no means like an officer of of it, so I got to assume there's all sorts of things that I should not speak with absolutes here. For all I know, they are looking at the playtest right now and going, "What did we let this guy write? Who are these people? Wow, what have we done?" But they've seen it. You know what I mean? We've definitely run everything by them, and they've read everything, and they reserve the absolute right to change their mind. The same way, Star Wars might take their expanded universe and want to hit a reboot button someday. I don't want to make any. I just want to be grateful that I get to work with these guys. But yeah, they've given it the stamp of approval for whatever that's worth.
All right, yeah, that's pretty good.
Yeah, definitely.
Dream is of course that they are gonna love all this, and they'll one day, like, I'll see one of the characters I made up make a background appearance on the show, but I won't get my hopes up. I know what I'm here to do. I'm here to entertain tabletop gamers. You know what I mean? I'm here to because it is an interesting space, right? To have an intellectual property developed for tabletop gaming. I know I really like to make my own character, and that's what we're trying to really do. We're trying to build up this game to the point where it's really easy for you to make your own character and feel like fully immersed with a less on the rails adventure. Because we had to make this playtest pretty like, okay, here's a scenario, we want you to try it. Here's a scenario, we want you to try it. But the hope is, as we release future stories, and we're going to for the Dragon Prince and Tales of Xadia, that they will be a little more open world, and you'll feel like you'll have even more agency, and things like making your own character and having a broader palette to play with are definitely coming.
Yeah, and there's a lot of potential here because, the Dragon Prince TV show is greenlit for, I think, 7 seasons total, and that's a lot of room between here and now to just expand on like the expanded universe, which apparently is getting expressed here in the tabletop RPG, but it's also hitting comics and all these other mediums. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask on behalf of a couple of people who knew that I was doing this interview, but we have pre-gens that are presented in the playtest material. These are unique playgens, if I'm not mistaken, and we also get to see Rayla. Are we expecting other characters from the TV show to get the pre-gen treatment? Perhaps a certain glow toad, or...
Wow, yeah, I would defer to Cam on exactly what the mechanics of a playable glow toad would be. I think you got to get some pretty specific rules for having like a playable character that's the size of a loaf of bread and expresses itself through colors rather than language. But we're going to do our best to get as much from the show into the playable materials as we can. I can't make any promises because we're still plotting out the book itself, which of course is already available for pre-order, but we're really trying to like make it as cool and as dense as possible without making it hard to digest. And we really do want to make it like a springboard into adventure too. So, we're still finding the balance of like just how much is going to be stuff directly from the show that you can bring to your table, and how much of it is going to be more stuff that we're trying to create from scratch that is approved by Wonderstorm and in the sort of canonical world, but hasn't been used on the show yet. That way you feel like maybe you've got more room to play with. So I'm not sure, we're still feeling out just how much, through the playtest as much as anything, how much people are looking forward to being the exact numerical value character from the show versus making their own.
Right. And we know that you're not really like the number one guy on the mechanics side. You're more on the story side, obviously, as the narrative lead.
Exactly. And like I get to do a lot of the bringing in of new stuff. I also get to do a lot of the writing of like having watched all 3 seasons a bunch of times now. I've rewatched some episodes like 7 or 8 times. I feel like I get to have a lot of fun also just sort of putting the world into the book and kind of describing the history of this show, the world in the show. I get to sort of like bring the world of the show into the book, so you don't feel like you necessarily have to remember every single episode to sit down and play. I as much as that I get to do, there is Cam. Cam gets to make all decisions. There's other folks who get to decide what goes in. Amanda Valentine, again, she's the editor, and she makes a lot of the tough calls about what goes in the book and what doesn't. So I can't confirm or deny any content, but we do have this book coming out that is going to, have playable adventure material in it. It's going to have, more pre-generated characters in it that you can play as. It'll give you a guide how to make your own character, and it'll hopefully wrap it all in a nice Cortex-y bow that you feel like, okay, like I'm ready to do whatever my play style is. I can jump into Tales of Xadia.
I guess what I would ask then is just like, so do you think that players are going to be satisfied and feel like their characters really do sort of fit into this Xadia setting based on what you've seen so far?
My experience as a nerd has been that, like, we've all got very passionate feelings about the things we love, and we've all got very active imaginations, either with our mind's eye or in actual, fan art we produce, fan fiction that we write, even just little sketches and social media adventures can really give people a sense of ownership. And I like to think that what we're really doing is just providing the most detailed toolbox that we can to, again, springboard. I did improv a lot back in the day, back when I was like 18 to 25 or whatever. I was on an improv team and a couple of improv teams. I was coaching improv. I did it all the time. And I'm fascinated with the idea in storytelling, especially tabletop storytelling, of a springboard where, you can define something very intricately, but in the end, improv comes off of it. So I'm going to really try to do my best to give everyone like a really cool place to jump into. And I can only hope that people will think it's authentic, because we're giving them this authentic toolkit, and we're showing them, say, a character like Rayla and how they fit into that toolkit. So you could go, okay, I'll compare my creation and I'll do my best to create something. I really hope that does feel good for people, and it really does make them excited. And what's nice about Cortex is it really is this very dynamic, malleable system. So I'm really hoping people will find a way to make this universe their own. And I'm sure they will. I'm sure they're going to take this game into places that my imagination, even at its best, which I'm very proud of, but I should eat some humble pie and say people are going to come up with some amazing stuff. And I see no reason not to take ownership and find legitimacy in it.
Yeah, I think fans are already enjoying like what's already laid out in the playtest adventure. The playtest adventure by itself, player agency aside, has I think 3 paths like laid out, right? Do you find that your improv experience factors into how you're writing these pre-made adventures, or?
A little bit. I mean, there's definitely this coincidental maybe improv element in there, where if you've ever studied long form improv, there's this old school long form called the Herald, where you've got 3 kind of interweaving plots where you see these 2-person scenes, and that's, I mean, a coincidence. I guess I thought I've thought of that at some point in my writing career, but these particular threads are more designed so if you've got a party of, say, like 5 people or just 1 person, you've got options. And the playtest is sort of got these 3 threads, but you could just see them as also just 3 decisions that you can start getting more cemented on. In the future Tales, I'm hoping to not limit it that much. There's definitely going to be an element of like, oh, here's a character I trust a little more than another. Here's a geographical direction that I need to head in, and things along that nature. But I don't know. Yet other than that, I don't know if improv informs the writing that much, except maybe for dialogue. I think improv helps a lot with dialogue because you're used to just how people will talk to each other off the top of their head.
well, avoiding spoilers, but I know that sort of like towards the end of the playtest, you do give a bunch of different suggestions about different ways that things could turn out that you can't really touch on because of sort of the length of the document and just what you can do. But you do sort of give some interesting examples of I'm trying to think of the right word for it, but sort of like pitches or prompts, I guess, prompts that people can use to sort of change the story in the ways they want to. So I thought that was kind of cool. And I mean, I don't know if that was really a result of improv, but I thought that was nice to have these different options and sort of just lightly develop things for people to springboard off of, like you've been saying.
Well, I think one thing improv really does kind of give you a sense of is when you're collaborating with other people, it's you got to give them gifts to build off of. You have to present them with new creations. I really do trust people are going to be able to spin the end of this story into some fun things. It would be really cool, and we're still feeling it out. Obviously, we're still in playtest, and we're still absorbing new information. But really cool if we could continue sort of a second beat off of the Lost Oasis playtest sort of arc. But I don't want to get too ahead of myself. We'll see. There could be all kinds of new ideas that come in. We could have just some random conversation that will inspire something different. And, we definitely know what we're going to put, for the most part, in the Tales of Xadia book that's coming out. But we might have room to put out all kinds of adventures. We'll see.
Yeah. And this is maybe way too early to ask, but I'm going to ask anyways. But for these tales, are we looking at a model where it's sort of like D&D modules where you just kind of drop it in, or say like Paizo's like adventure pass for Pathfinder, where it's this long form like 6 books adventure, or anything between? Or
yeah, I mean, it's definitely too early to say. I really like how Cortex sort of doesn't have something as tightly bound as a D&D module. The structure of the tales is such that it's really easy and fun to write. I'm hoping other people will come up with their own, and when it comes to how we're going to release multiple tales, a lot of that depends on just the state of the world. You know what I mean? The publishing industry has definitely been shaped by the last year. I myself have been quarantining pretty hard, and so have a lot of people who work in printing presses, and I'm really good friends with some folks who own a tabletop gaming store and play space in Burbank, California. And it's interesting to see how people are playing it all. So how they'll be released will often be, I think, dictated by, can people even go to conventions? Can people sit down at a table with their friends? Or will it all be digital? It's that kind of thing might even come first. Whereas I think a lot of that used to be like, oh, well, we'll come up with the idea and the world will just work for us. We'll be able to write to our hearts. We'll be able to write to our heart's content, and we'll just find 1,000 outlets for it. But now it's kind of like, well, we really want to make sure people can, accessibility is really important to us, and we really want to make sure that we can put out whatever content we have in a way that as many people can enjoy as possible.
Yeah, that sounds good. And Dan, if it's okay with you, I was thinking that since we have the narrative lead for Tales of Xadia, it would be good to sort of maybe dive a little bit deeper into the storytelling process that you go through on the project.
Sure.
So I was just curious, like, for example, when you were first developing this idea for the playtest, did you get to pitch the story, or was there something that you were asked to work off of? Or how much of that was in your control, and how much of it was, you being asked to do something?
I was very lucky. I got to totally pitch. I got to lean on my background in TV and publishing and just sort of pitch them story arcs. I got to pitch them characters. And, this is something I've loved since college and when I was studying, like, dramaturgy and playwriting. But, like, I love folklore and character archetypes, and that kind of knowledge really has gone a long way in sort of prepping these dynamic stories where characters that we call catalysts come in and they have agency and they change based on your choices in the game. So this kind of storytelling benefits a lot from being able to see not just like a beginning, middle, and end to a story, but like the players in the story and the stakes. So like I mostly was pitching stuff like geographical locations, stakes, and characters. And those characters had to have agency. I came up with a whole list that I showed to Cam of, character motivations. I looked at what I thought were sort of archetypal catalysts in folklore and myths and things like that, and kind of made a list of all the different kinds of agencies there were. And I pitched characters based off of where they fit into that list of sort of archetypal characters. And, I like where everything ended up. What was really fun about Lost Oasis is how big it got. I definitely want to make sure I don't overwhelm characters, but what I really enjoyed was, this has got to be the biggest, most in-depth, well-illustrated playtest I've ever seen in my life. You know what I mean? Like I've played a fair bit of tabletop role-playing, and I'm used to playtests being these very small black and white documents with like no original art on them. And this thing looks like a book. This thing it's some of the characters I came up with, we got some really beautiful art drawn. It's long and in a good way. There's not just scenes for you to try out and a couple of mechanics to roll around. There's a complete story, and like you said, I included what can come next even. I tried to give people a hint of how, like, if you like this playtest, just keep playing, don't wait for us. Just, like, go ahead and take your characters. And that means a lot to me. I really love the show, and I know what it's like to love an intellectual property and to take agency and feel like, oh, like, I want to be a kid again dressed up as a character from this property and just run around in a sandbox and have fun. And it's our job to stick as much as we can to this IP, but I really like how this playtest is beefy, so hopefully people will get a lot out of it.
Yeah, I think that plays well to just Cortex in general, because Cortex is very comfortable with splitting the party, which you don't necessarily get with some of the more traditional gaming. And I think that is what factors into why we have such lean playtest materials for other games, or just lean adventures, because it almost always assumes that the party's going to hang out together. Whereas with Cortex or with Tales of Xadia, in my own playtest, we split off into 3 different groups, so it's very easy to just kind of spin off, and having that extra material there, having it be so beefy, was a huge benefit.
Cool, good. What I like about it is it's entertaining to watch your friends sort of be horrified by things, or entertaining to watch your friends be shocked or surprised or have to make difficult decisions. And I really feel like this is a very interactive kind of tabletop. And so Cortex is really, by asking you to have these scenes, it's entertaining when you're not in a scene to just sort of look around and be like, oh yeah, everybody is in a weird spot right now. And as opposed to, there's a lot of ways you can feel like splitting the party is boring, or it makes the difficulties impossible to achieve, because you need a certain amount of brute force to overcome something. But that's why I really tried to come at this not like there is a set numerical way to win. It's really much more about the stakes. Like what is your character and their choices and how they interpret the stakes is what's really important. It's not about achieving something through absolute mathematical elitism or something.
Well, I was actually really impressed, though, because the way that the adventure is structured, you get to see a whole lot of different types of scenes, and you call out some of the different ones that are in Cortex, like bridge scenes or things like that. But also just like a bunch of different types of challenges, physical, social, what have you. So you really get to sort of see a wide range of what Cortex can do.
And I got to give Cam and Amanda credit. Like they really made sure. Like I tried to come at it with it. I read some of their other Cortex books before trying my narrative take on this playtest, but they were good at making sure we had variety in there.
Okay, yeah, that's actually what I was going to ask was, did you sort of construct scenes with certain types of mechanical challenges in mind, or did it just happen to work out?
It's so mechanic oriented, your question. I really do want to make sure I give full credit to Amanda Valentine and Cam Banks, who, they looked at my story and they looked at my proposed scenes, and they're like, okay, well, why don't you do another pass and make sure every scene is based off of some sort of momentous choice and some sort of obstacle to overcome, stuff like that. So these roles, these contests, these challenges, these tests are all like the pivotal part of the scene. So yeah, I got to give full credit to them for the mechanics part of it.
You know what I like here is, with this emphasis on characters and with the release of the playtest, something that we don't get in the Cortex Prime Handbook are catalysts. Now, that's a word we've been throwing around a couple times in this interview, but for listeners who don't know, catalysts are the important NPCs that are specifically not static, right? They're supposed to be dynamic and changing as you go through the adventure, right?
Yeah, and I'll give Cam again. Cam gets credit for the mechanical part of this, which is they get assigned a die value, like say like a D4 or a D6, and then they can get stepped up into a more multi-sided die or a lesser-sided die, depending on how the story has progressed with that catalyst. I sort of came to Cam and I pitched this idea, and he was like, what are we going to do about big bads in these? What are we going to do about villains and bosses and stuff? And my idea with catalysts was I really like video games and tabletop games, which it's harder to find this in tabletop, but I was like, let's do it. Let's be the ones who do my ideal, where instead of having a big bad or like a big boss, everybody's got a stake, and it's really like a bunch of mini bosses just sort of sprinkled around. And you got to go, oh, here's, my choice. And then based off of your choice, the mini bosses might kind of like you and be like, oh, I'm powerful, but I want to throw my hat in with you and lend my power to your group. Whereas someone else will look at your choice and maybe you wanted them to like you, but because of your choice, they're going to go, whoa, 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 I'm going to amass my power against you. You're kind of a jerk. What do you, get out of my way. Yeah. I came in here with agency, and you, the player, made this choice that totally goes against. So it's never absolutely determined who's a good guy and who's a bad guy, and it really moves you away from that idea of math being the king, that you can go in here with an idea that, oh, I know the big bad is Feathershaw, so I'm going to build a character that's really good at defeating Feathershaw. Well, if you play the playtest with one group of friends, Feathershaw might be BFFs with you and might start off being a little brusque and confrontational, but by the end you'll be like, I get Feathershaw. They are smart, resourceful. but then you might go play with a second group of friends, and your friends are immediately like, Feathershaw sucks. Feathershaw's selfish and a creep, and should we kill Feather? We need to at least tie up let's at least beat up Feathershaw and tie Feathershaw to a lamppost. I want to be able to say, like, if you do that, that was not my intention. I want to be able to say, all I did was give the character agency and a backstory, make them so three-dimensional that you feel like that was meaningful, your choice. And I think that there's this idea in tabletop that, like, if you boil everything down to math, it solves everything. And I think that can be true, but we still have to find new ways to do it. And I'm pretty happy with how Catalysts turned out math-wise as well as storytelling-wise, because the ones we put in Lost Oasis are fun, and there's going to be more coming.
Yeah, well, I definitely think you succeeded in terms of, avoiding things being entirely black and white. And even the characters with their different motivations and sort of with the player agency in there also sort of influences, the various situations that they're getting into. And, there might be players who want to try to help people evacuate and escape, and then other people who are really concerned about getting an artifact, or another one that's interested in talking to the guy who basically runs the town and things like that. And the story is obviously going to be shaped off of the choices that those players make. And I think that the fact that they can turn out in so many different ways is definitely due to the dynamic way that the characters were designed and the story was crafted. So I think you did a really good job with that.
Thanks. I know I saw some, I don't want to do too many spoilers, but I saw on Discord there was somebody who had like an absolute nightmare ending to their playtest run they did with their friends, and I thought that was hilarious. Because, I think I was the kind of guy who I would play Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, and it was so hard to be evil. Like, I would be good. I would be like, please tell me I made all the best choices. I need to end with the most positive, light-sided choice. And then I would be like, well, I want to play it again. It was such a fun game. I want to be evil, but I could never get very far as evil. I would feel so bummed out that I could never be the reason for even like make-believe pixelated suffering. I think it's funny that some people have already played this and been like, oh, whoa, we're setting this all on fire. But I know most people won't, and I hope I gave people enough fun puzzles to kind of get past, little social puzzles to work out with their narrator of how they're going to get this artifact out of Anim.
This is a good transition to our first listener question. It's from Davriel from Discord, and I'm going to actually reword it because it's their original question is a little bit of a spoiler for those who haven't seen the TV show. But yeah, they wanted to know how, in general, how powers are going to be. Now we've already seen this in the playtest. You're going to take mage-like or magic-like distinctions and assets and stuff. But you were talking about earlier how there's an emphasis on character archetypes. And, Cortex Prime uses archetypes as an option for creating characters. Is that what we're looking at here? Are we going to have like a laundry list of archetypes to act as a springboard?
Yeah, I can't promise how it's going to look exactly in the book. I think we want to give you guys a really clear idea of how something works in the show is going to work in the game. And in the show, specifically, we're talking about powers. You mean like magic. There's the primal magics, and then there's dark magic. And so we want to make sure we're really clear, there's consequences to dark magic. Being a dark mage is something only humans have the stomach for, and really can cast because they're not born with magic. But there's all this history behind it, right? And Callum on the TV show is like one of the first humans in centuries to be able to harness primal magic for himself. And so we want to make sure it's clear, like, this is how it could happen, but we're not going to make it so you can just jump in and do whatever powers you want just because you thought of the powers without at least feeling like you and your narrator have a common language to discuss how it would be possible. So, I think it would only make sense if, if you wanted to have powers, you and your narrator worked out exactly how it was going to go, because it's power, right? Like, it's meaningful, world-shaping stuff. So, going back to what I was saying earlier about your imagination, nobody wants to stifle anybody's imagination. There's going to be all kinds of stuff people come up with that we don't include in the book. Or I would be like, well, if you can make it work at your table, why not just have fun with it and not worry about what I think, But at the same time, I think we can all agree it's not necessarily fun for the whole table if you come in here and go, well, I've got a spell that allows the sun to shrink to the size of a fist, and it will absorb and melt anything it touches, and it obeys my command, and it's called the Sun Hand. And it's like,
oh, so you were in my playtest.
Yeah. But I think there's a lot, we're going to make sure we make it really clear, like, however your character, be they elf or human, wants to have powers, there's a way to make it work in the world of the game that's fun.
Yeah.
So, I think we give a pretty good example with Babukar, the Sunfire Mage in the playtest. So I think if you're curious about that, look at how they work and keep an eye out. We're definitely, as soon as we can, going to show more. We're still developing it. We're seeing how it looks in the playtest. We haven't made up our minds. We want it to be good. So we're gonna do our best to be open to feedback and make it as cool as possible. That's what I would keep an eye on. Keep an eye on old Babukar, who, of course, if you're watching, our live stream is run by Cam Banks himself. So if you want to see the guy, the mastermind behind Cortex, running a Sun Mage, you want that's the best window into power you get. It's the show is Roll and Keep, which you're probably familiar with, but it's Thursdays on the Fandom Tabletop Twitch.
Yeah. We should probably just quickly just make a statement that obviously we've established that you're not the person who's in charge of the mechanics, and you're also really you're not really supposed to give any spoilers or really comment on like what the game is going to be like, until it's out or more developed, right? So we will probably end up skipping questions that specifically get into those sorts of areas.
I want to make sure people know, like, I'm as excited as you are to see how this stuff turns out, but we want to take the playtest seriously, and we want this to be good, and we want to put out the best book possible. So it means we got to be a little coy.
Well, actually, I think we only have time for one more question. And this does talk about mechanics, but I think you can maybe speak from it from, at the very least, being a potential GM or player yourself. But Caleb from Discord as well wanted to know, what was the coolest mechanic that emerged in attempting to stay true to the source materials?
I really like how players get to the island. That's something I got to have a really fun conversation with Wonderstorm about, but I really like how Feathershaw uses their cloak to harness moon magic and sort of like using a moonbeam light get the party up into the city. That, of course, is also a part of the playtest is like, yeah, you automatically agree to get on this magic moonbeam with Feathershaw, and that sounds pretty risky to do that with this catalyst. But I'm glad we got to make it as cool as we could and tie it to some magic from the show, so at least players feel like, well, I am being forced into this sort of adventure in a bottle, but at least it's through what feels like some authentic show magic.
Yeah, and I have to wonder how many people are now going to want their own like moon cloak to be able to float off and do things now that they've seen that.
Well, this was a catalyst who had the cloak and not a player, so perhaps if a player can find a way through multiple tales to achieve a connection with a moon artifact such as Feathershaw's cloak, then after many play sessions they will have earned such a powerful artifact. But until that time, who knows?
I was just curious, especially since you're the narrative lead, do you have any advice in terms of playing Tales of Xadia, both from, just like storytelling side or just with your experiences GMing or playing with it, how you would approach it or what you think is the best way to go about, getting into the game?
Well, if you're a narrator, as we call it for Tales of Xadia, have an open mind. There is that improv idea of yes and, where you have a scene partner ask if they want to do something, you make it real and then you add to it. There's, I think, a lot here, and if you read the whole thing through, so you feel like you've got the complete toolkit, you kind of know where the threads are going, which is really the most important part. If you know where the threads are headed, when the big plot devices are chronologically supposed to happen. What if I could say that word? It would sound like chronologically. But, if you know that what's going to be open to them going way off the rails. This is a play test. And I think if you know how the tests, contests, and challenges are supposed to work, if you can have that confidence, let them make weird choices and present them with tests, contests, and challenges that are not in the play test that you made up yourself. Why not? As long as you get it, and we really try to walk you through it, then I would try to give yourself that gift of like letting your particular table do crazy things. If they want to try to make like a scarecrow to scare off some kind of monster that I don't want to spoil, like out of, found objects, just because that's not in the playtest doesn't mean you can't go for it. So, I would just keep an open mind, listen to your players. Don't treat this like what you might have treated previous tabletop pre-made adventures. Let this be a toolkit and a living world at your table, and enjoy when things go a little off the rails. But, I mean, definitely let us know in the Discord how it happened in the spoiler channel, because we'd love to hear that.
Words of wisdom to definitely cherish for, I think, any adventure, really. But, yeah, as we bring this to a close, Dan, where can listeners find you?
I do stand-up comedy on Twitch every Friday night, 7 p.m. Pacific. I used to tour the country and sometimes Canada, and I can't do that anymore. Especially, I'm a cancer survivor, so I'm not taking any risks with my body and such. I would love if people want to check me out there. You can check me out on Twitter also, where I get very angry and political. Forgive me if my tastes don't abide by yours, but I love all of you, and I mean you no harm. I'm just a comedian with a loud mouth. Definitely keep an eye on talesofxadia.com. Sign up for the email list. They've been nice enough to let me do a couple of behind-the-scenes emails on that email list. So if you're already getting those emails, you're probably seeing them talking about some of the pre-made characters and stuff like that. So, if you've enjoyed hearing me blab about this stuff, you'll get to see me talk about all kinds of stuff like my love of medieval weapons and all that in those emails. And I would also be remiss to not mention my Dungeons & Dragons podcast. You're all welcome to check out Nerd Poker if you want to hear me Dungeon Master.
Nice. And we'll be sure to put links to your social media in the show notes for listeners who want to go check all that out.
JT, where can listeners find us?
Yeah, so one of the best ways to get us is through email, which is pbcpodcast@d20radio.com. We also have a Facebook group for those who like to engage on that platform. Kirby and I are also on the official Cortex Discord server, and so is Dan, if I'm not mistaken. He's lurking around there somewhere.
Yep.
Most of the time. Other than that, we're on Twitter at Primed by Cortex. And oh yes, and we also have the D20 Radio server, Discord server as well, where you can find our own little Primed by Cortex podcast channel. If you want to get us any questions or want to tell us how awesome it was having Dan on the show and how you want him back, feel free to drop us a line. Tell him you want him to come back, and we'll make it happen.
Till next time, folks. Later.
Later.